We are here for an elders panel. So we have some wonderful local elders. And I'm going to actually, I should say, my name is Scott Williams. I'm the executive director at Spectrum. My pronouns are he and him. And I'm just going to pass it to my left here, and we'll just have everyone introduce yourself, share your pronouns, and tell us a little bit about what you do in the community.
Hello, my name is Lyn McGinnis, and my pronouns, they haven't been invented yet, so let's just say they, them. That'll do for a start. I have been involved in the community for decades. I one time was for one hair-raising period, I was vice chair of a tri-pride event. I have been involved in a couple of local publications, the Voice magazine, and I also was involved with the physical version of the Spectrum community calendar that came out, and have been involved in various other ways, and continue to see this as a very important part of my life in this community.
Sorry, I'm Cait Glasson. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a trans woman and an activist. I've been an activist now for, what, Jim, 30 years?
30 years, yes.
Yeah,
Indeed.
yeah. So, in fact, when we asked to have Pride Day declared back in 1994, that was me.
Yes.
And they stopped declaring days at all.
Nice
Rather than declare
solution.
Pride Day. Yeah. I don't know if they ever started again. No? There you go. Woohoo. I broke them.
Okay. Is this projecting properly? Very good. My name is Jim Parrott. My pronouns are he and him. Okay, I was at the first meeting of GLOW back March 8th, 1971. I was active in GLOW for the 70s. I took the 80s off for various reasons, and I joined again in the 90s. I helped start up the discussion group that GLOW had, and I got involved with the Pride Committee the first time we had a really well-organized committee. Cait was at the first part, but I didn't really join until 1996. I stepped back in 2001. New relationship, you have to put a lot of energy into a new relationship. And I was only 8 years away from retiring from the library. And then I rejoined the community again in 2011 when I started up a historical project. As a librarian, I had saved up all sorts of stuff. And then 2 months later, I joined the Waterloo Region Rainbow Coalition. And a year later, we started up Spectrum. And so I was involved with Spectrum at an executive level for several years until I got almost completely burned out. And so I'm still involved doing stuff. Did that answer the question?
It does. Thank you.
Excellent.
My first question for you folks is, what does pride mean to you? And do you have a favorite pride memory?
Pride, still working? Okay. Pride is not being afraid, is not hiding, is having a complete balance between who I am personally and who I am publicly. It is having a sense of safety and of comfort and a measure of confidence in just being who I am. It also is, of course, community. It's also celebration. It's also community and coming together when there are challenges. So it's both a personal and a community reality for me. None of which was there when I was growing up. None of which existed anything like it does now. The whole generational thing is very important to appreciate. Colossal number of steps. You've got challenges now, but the steps to get here have been tremendous.
For me, Pride Day, or Pride generally, is about not being ashamed. There's a lot of pressure on us to feel ashamed of who we are, and as far as I'm concerned, pride is the antidote to that. As far as a best pride memory, that would be going to the Dyke March in 1994 for the first time. That was my first pride, and it was amazing. And it made me determined to come back here and make pride happen here. So the next year in 1995, I got together with, a bunch of people anyway. We got together at the Club Renaissance and started Pride. So, yay.
Well, like many people have said here, it means not being ashamed of yourself. Um, the actual Pride celebration, however, is a place where everything is kind of normalized, where you don't feel like a freak for a little while, and everything seems normal. It's something that we wish happened all of the time, every day of every year. And so whenever we have the Pride celebration, there's this kind of feeling that could we make our lives such that this is the way it was all the time? And it's a hard thing. As Lyn has mentioned, we've moved forward by very small steps. I was involved with Glow at the very beginning. I was on a television show on CKCO TV in 1973, which I guess is 51 years ago. And my God, it was a phone-in thing. The questions that we got some of them were okay, but many of them were just absolutely awful. And we'd go to classes, psychology classes, and we get questions that were actually really quite insulting. This is where we were starting to hear words like pedophile. And honestly, I thought we'd heard the end of it. And now that is surfacing once again this year and the last year. Pedophile, groomers, that kind of thing. So Pride, I went to my first Pride protest, I think in 1993 in Toronto. This was not a Pride parade. It was a protest. We walked along a street. People were yelling at us. They were throwing things at us. The actual Pride parades didn't happen till later. So I understand the whole notion that Pride is a protest. My favorite Pride memory was probably I went to a library conference in 1986 in San Francisco, and it turned out that it was the same week they were having Pride. So I went to Pride, and I thought, look at all these people. This is just wonderful. And I saw Glinda, the good witch, in the distance, and she turned around, and she had this wonderful full beard. And so it was quite... And I saw Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, lots of the kind of crazy energy that makes you feel like something is actually happening. And that's what was happening in the 70s and maybe not the 80s so much because of AIDS, but then the 90s. This incredible sense of energy that we're going somewhere and we're doing something. And for me, that's what Pride is. Lyn talked about the gradual accretion of rights and things like that, but there was this crazy sense of energy and excitement. So that is what Pride is for me. That's the long answer, honey.
No, that's great. The next thing I want to ask about is if you think about the year in which you came out to yourself and then compare it with today, what do you think are the biggest changes in society when it comes to acceptance of 2S LGBTQ plus folks?
Okay. I don't know if there's language for how different it is. There was no supports. There was no information. There was no conversation going on in the public sphere. But there was this huge undercurrent of hostility, and which sometimes, of course, broke out. I had that throughout my life, where I think from very early on, when I was very young, I realized there's something different about me. And the oafs and louts saw it right away. And so I had a lot of physical abuse. And I think one of the low points in my life was in a schoolyard, having a bunch of kids standing all around me and spitting from all sides. this is the hostility. It's still there. It's an undercurrent. It's under there. And very recently, that's starting to find a voice again. So initially, it was extraordinarily, well, sure, it was a brave thing to do. It was also a crazy thing to do, but it was absolutely necessary. It was absolutely essential, because up until I was in my 20s, I never wanted to look in the mirror. I didn't like the person in the mirror at all. Never had any relation. I didn't know who this person was. And so getting to the point where I could be at home in my own skin was a very long haul. And I got there. And as I was getting there, I was starting to see things happening around. There's just cumulative. A lot of little things have happened on a lot of fronts, legally and culturally and artistically, that just shifted things. Things that seemed immovable shifted. And I think this is something we need to remember, both as a hopeful sign, but also as a warning. Shifting can happen the other way too. And I think we're starting to see an itch that's trying to move things. So there's no support. I mean, if I had GSAs, which is Gay Straight Alliance in schools, had any of that kind of thing, my life would have been so much, would have been very, very different. My childhood would have been much happier. As it was a painful and frightening and lonely time when I came out. And I just have tremendous appreciation for, I did my part for what it's worth. I did a lot of writing in the imprint, another University of Waterloo paper, a lot of other things. I did my part, and a whole lot of people did their part. And that's why we're able to sit outside today and have this conversation. I'm grateful for that.
What Lyn said, it applies just equally to me. I mean, I told my parents when I was 4 that I was a girl, and they said, "Don't ever say that again." And in the end, it wouldn't have made a bit of difference, because in 1970 there wasn't a blind bit of difference it would have made. If they had been super supportive, they could have been the best supportive parents in the world. It wouldn't have made any difference. It wasn't going to take me off the express train to hell that was puberty. So, yeah. So it's night and day, the difference. I mean, because now there are kids who can come out and they will say, you know, I'm a girl or I'm a boy or whatever, and their parents will say, okay. Like, wow, that's amazing. That's fantastic. Not every kid, obviously, but a lot of kids get that now, and that's fantastic. I envy the life that those kids will end up getting to have, because they will not be broken in the million ways that we were broken. So I envy them that life, but I don't hate them for it. I envy them for it. Yeah.
I knew I was a gay man or a gay boy when I was 5 years old. We didn't have kindergarten back then, and so I actually had sex with another 5-year-old boy. We turned 6, we entered school, and everything changed because the whole weight of socialization dropped on top of us. He ended up leading a straight life, and I ended up being in the closet until I was in, 23 or 24 years old. So there was a very long period of time. But I came out I understood at the year 1948. I lived through the 50s as a person in grade school and high school, and it was awful. I just hated it. I was so eager to leave Yorkton, Saskatchewan, a tiny kind of town, and get out of there and go somewhere else. I ended up in Kingston, Queen's University, which I actually thought must be the most sophisticated city in the whole wide world by comparison with Yorkton, Saskatchewan. So it was about being in the closet all the time. For some reason, I never got beaten up ever in my whole life. And I honestly don't know how I managed that, because as a young person, I was what would have been described as an effeminate young man. For reasons that I'm not sure, I pitched my voice really high. As I've gotten older, it's come down to a regular baritone, which is my regular speaking voice. Although, as some people know, I am occasionally mistaken for a dowager, a woman with a very deep voice, but whose voice goes up and down. So with some effort, I can actually pretend I can pass for straight. I have male privilege, I have white privilege, and if I try really hard and don't talk too much, I can come across as straight. But the thing is, many of my friends can't. There are many people in the community who over the decades are visibly gay or visibly trans. People who are visibly trans are on the front lines of homophobia. They are not homophobia, transphobia. They're confronted with transphobia all the time. I decided a long time ago that I was not, for the most part, going to try to pass as straight. And the man I'm now married to, I met 25 years ago. Since the year 2000, we've been walking hand in hand when we're in public and wearing this hat that has the rainbow triangle, trans rights or human rights, and a two-spirit one on this side. I have chosen to give up straight privilege. I have chosen to present as a gay man. So I lived through the 50s, and that was hell. And when I work with refugees from Africa and the Middle East, I have a little bit of a feeling what they're facing there. They're coming from a place that actually, for the most part, is worse than Saskatchewan in the 1950s, but I know what it was like then. And that is why I am so deeply concerned about the changes that we have started to see in the last few years, where people like populists are becoming emboldened by politicians, certain politicians. So, oh man. So I've got privilege. I've chosen not to exercise straight privilege. I have a whole bunch of other privileges too. The biggest one probably was having parents who accepted me and who allowed me to be a stubborn little boy. And that hasn't changed through the rest of my life. I do not take shit.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you.
That was fun.
And Cait, you mentioned the kids having a largely an easier time, and I'm thinking today we saw many parents with children in the market earlier, which is wonderful because who knows if those kids are part of our community or not, but they're experiencing 2S LGBTQ folks and culture, which I think is great. And Lyn, you mentioned doing your part, and I just want to say on my behalf, thank you to all of you for all of the decades of work that you have done, because I certainly would not have had the life that I've had without what you've done. I wouldn't be having a job at Spectrum. Spectrum wouldn't exist. So thank you. The next question I have is, what is something you'd really like younger 2S LGBTQ folks to know about our history?
I think, history is important. History is like memory. Without memory, we can't function individually. And it's very important for this specific instance that people are aware that where we are now is relatively recent development, and that there have been times before where there has been some movement towards the level of acceptance and welcoming of diversity in the West, and that has been taken away again. I think that it is very important for us to appreciate what has been done by people in circumstances that it is hard, including for us to imagine. And to be aware and learn from that, because as we are, all of us, we're all sort of singing from the same book here. We got to keep our eyes open and keep being aware of what's going on, because I remembered hearing that history doesn't repeat itself, but it can rhyme. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of a rhyming going on here, a bit of a pushback. Jim mentions about how gloriously, fabulously celebratory our community was 15, 20 years ago. And we've got a lot still to celebrate, but the there's now a pushback. There is a pushback. It's becoming more and more organized, and we need to be aware of that, and we need to do everything we can to address that, because all of this has been taken away. What you have to learn from history is that things are always changing, and people who sit back on their laurels can be in for a surprise. And so we need to be aware and vigilant. We need to know where we have come from, and we need to look at the signs when things start not going so well, and appreciating that, and not saying, oh, well, that was then. It's now as well. So it's unfortunate that we have to have these kind of conversations, but we're going to be having very different ones if we don't do it now.
Two things. One, queerness didn't start in 1969. We go back thousands of years in every culture in the world. We have always been around, and we always will be around. There's no way they're ever going to stop us from existing. So let's be clear on that. And the other thing that, while I absolutely agree with what Lyn said about the pushback that's here, these things go in cycles. And that means that they come in cycles, but they also go away in cycles. So we just have to endure for a couple more years, probably, and they will get tired of it and move on to something else for a while. And then in 20 years, they can come back and start it all again for non-binary people.
I mean, one of the things people should remember is we went through these periods back in even in the 70s and the 90s of crazy energy, all sorts of stuff happening. I know about this particularly because I've been documenting the history of our local queer and trans community. So there's all this crazy excitement and energy, but I do want to point to part of what got us where we are, or at least where we were a few years ago. There was a gradual accretion of rights for gay people, bisexual people, trans people, that happened over a long period of time. But there was one critical element that helped get us there, and that is visibility. Visibility not just on television, visibility among politicians, and visibility among those of us who are privileged enough or crazy enough that we are willing to be transparent about who we are when we are in public. Visibility is absolutely key. If you're an ally, wear badges like this. This is what I tell the people at our PFLAG group, is you can help your children best if you wear a badge that says trans rights are human rights. Visibility is absolutely critical. When William and I go on the LRT or the bus, we see people who are looking at my buttons and smiling and looking more confident. Some of these people are visibly trans. Every time somebody sees this kind of visibility, it helps strengthen them if they're part of the community. So William and I walk hand in hand because, first of all, it feels wonderful holding the hand of someone you love. Second of all, we do it for straight people to make sure they understand we're here and we are not going away. But the other thing is we do it for people who are thinking, I'm alone in the world. I'm absolutely alone. And then they start seeing other people who present themselves visibly to some extent or other. I've said before, I have a lot of privilege. And part of it is the stubbornness, of course, that really goes a long way. But visibility has helped us to get where we were. And we're going to have to keep that up because of the forces that are in play right now. Yeah, but lots of excitement, lots of energy. Hundreds of people in Canada worked to get us where we are. And I don't want to see that change. As I said, I work with refugees from other countries. I hear the dreadful stories they tell. They're worse stories than I had to go through in the 1950s. But I have some feeling of what it was like to have to hide in order to keep your life safe. I don't want to see us going back to a place like that again.
Thank you. And Jim, you mentioned the Grand River Rainbow Historical Project that you started in 2011. Do you want to talk just a bit about that?
Yeah, I'm a librarian, professional librarian, but I'm also a massive pack rat. And so already I think in 2005, people were saying, okay, why don't you take all that stuff that you saved up? You've nearly retired, change it into an online historical project. And I thought, no, I'm busy right now. I retired in 2007. It took 4 years to clean up the bedroom. Lots of piles of paper all over the place. And I finally started it up. I coded it in HTML code. I got copyright permissions from all sorts of agencies like Rainbow Chorus, Rainbow Reels, all sorts of groups in town, in addition to the paper I had sitting in boxes all over the place. So digitized it, organized it. It basically an archival thing. So there's a lot of stuff there about our history. It doesn't cover everything because with history, people end up throwing things out. For example, Woods, Women Out of Doors. We've managed to save some pieces of documentation for that, but there's whole big gaps. And of course, when social media started to be a big thing, people stopped creating printed documents about their events, put it on Facebook, put it on other things. It's evaporated. It's gone. Anyway, we do have a history, and I've documented it back to 1970, roughly speaking. Anyway, thank you for asking. I always like having that question.
Yes. Well, I think it's amazing because we're fortunate. We're one of very few communities who have any kind of archive like that. And the physical archives have now been transferred to KPL, to the Grace Schmidt Room.
Yeah.
So they will be doing exhibits and you can visit them in person. But you can also make use of the documents that have been digitized on the website. And many researchers do. I know Jim hears from them all the time. People have made use of them for various studies. Lyn, what is a message that you would like to give younger 2S LGBTQ plus activists?
Activists. Well, I think while there are not as many challenges as when I was that age, this is still a mission. This is still it's a number of things. It's a self-affirmation first and foremost, but it's also a mission. You're also helping others by helping yourself. The whole idea of being visible, helping others who are having in difficulty. I think we still have a great far to go as far as we have come, and outside of the negative stuff, we're still growing as a community. We're still broadening our appreciation of the spectrum that we are part of. The community has gone through phases where originally it really was largely a gay community, and then gay and lesbian. As somebody who is also bisexual, I can tell you when I first came out in the 90s, there was not enthusiastic reaction to that. The term fence sitter was one among other terms that was used. And at that time, it's hard to believe now, but at that time, anything other than sort of parties or dress up or something like that, transgender wasn't really on the radar. And so that the community through stages, it's just like we've added letters to the acronym. We've grown in our own self-definition. We have grown in learning about ourselves and in seeing more and more of the diversity within our community and seeing that as a good thing, seeing that as an enriching thing. And I think that's an important thing that needs to continue. We're not done that yet. Just continue to be aware of what's going on and standing up for yourself and standing up for others and looking towards a wonderful future, which will see even more wonderful things than we've seen up to this point.
What I would say is if you see something, do something about it. Don't wait for somebody else to do it. Just do something about it. So, like last fall, I had a young friend come to me and say that they'd had a really terrible time at one of the hospitals in town. going through the ER and their pronouns weren't used and their name wasn't used, and it was really unpleasant for them. And so I said, okay, just leave it with me. And Monday morning, I phoned the hospital and made a complaint and said, this isn't good enough. It's 2024. Let's see some action here. It's about time you did something about this. And as part of that, I ended up on a committee that's helping the hospital to get things sorted out. And as part of that, we're actually solving that problem. So it's a matter of being visible and speaking up, right? So it's what we were talking about earlier about being visible, being important in its own right, and speaking up when you see something, right? When there's a situation that needs something done, be the one to do it. That's all it takes. That's how you become an activist, is you see something and you do something about it.
Oh boy, I'm not exactly sure how to answer this question. I just partly to respond to what Cait said. It is possible to work with various institutions, and Spectrum has, in fact. You work with people at the top level, next level of management, but sometimes it takes a long time for the message to get through right to frontline staff. And that's sometimes where the problem is. Not always, but sometimes you can have all these lovely policies in place, but if it doesn't filter down to frontline staff, so, going into the hospital and having to deal with crap like that, Cait did the right thing. And being proactive like that is really, really critical. I think I would like to reframe this question as, what would I say to myself 50 years ago when I was, in fact, a young activist? Wow. I would have said, for starters, keep working hard. And especially when I got to the 1979, I was starting to come into despair because I thought, the legislation is happening so slowly, I just wasn't sure it would ever change. I mean, I thought this is at a snail's pace. It wasn't until we got into the 1990s that things started to accelerate. And sometimes you just have to understand patience. Be patient. Work hard and be patient. Not everyone can be transparent about who they are, but you can help out as an ally as well. And so that would be one thing I would say to people who are allies. As far as young activists, I guess the big thing I would say is, don't give up. Don't fall into despair. It's easy to fall into despair because things sometimes move very, very slowly. I mean, you remember all that crap about the flag with Kitchener.
Yeah.
My God, the council got so furious with us. But we eventually got them to fly the flag. I mean, that was 2014. They flew the flag in 2015, but my God, what we had to do to get there.
And we got the Catholic School Board to fly it, 3 years ago, two years ago?
It took quite a bit longer, my dear.
Took us a while to do that, but we actually got the local Catholic School Board to fly the Pride flag at their schools.
Yes.
It was the first board in Ontario, Catholic board in Ontario, to do that.
It was a bit of a thrill for the board, though.
Yeah, it was.
There was things happening.
They were pretty nonplussed.
Yes, there was lots of stuff happening there. But the thing is, activist, if you're a young activist, don't despair. Things sometimes take a while, and then sometimes they speed up like you would not believe. Yeah. Oh, I think I've just about tuckered myself out with all this stuff.
Well, thank you. So in a minute, I'm going to ask for some final thoughts from you folks, so you can think about that. But one of the reasons that Spectrum tries to do an event like this every Pride season is for the opportunity for intergenerational conversations. So if there's anyone from the audience who has a question that you'd like to ask these folks, then you can let us know. And any final thoughts from our panelists?
I'm grateful to be here. I am grateful to have been asked. The idea of being accorded this kind of affection and respect for making it, for getting to the end and saying I'm here, not the end, but at the latter part of life. I appreciate that. That's I mean, respect for experience and for, for insight from that, that's not always present in society. And I think it's very unfortunate. I think we have a lot to offer. And I think that, and I appreciate that I've been given that opportunity here. I think we still have a lot of things to contribute, and we welcome that opportunity. So thank you.
I loved your comment about how this is so benign, but I loved your comment about how in the digital era we don't make those flyers and like hard, tangible evidence um, of queer events and community and culture like that. And similarly, I think, I mean, Spectrum aside, a lot of the community spaces have also shifted to online where they're not so tangible and in some ways easier to access, but in some ways even more hidden. And as folks who have been around pre-internet and all of that stuff, I'm just really curious if you have any stories you'd like to share about some of those tangible spaces that maybe used to exist in the region.
Thank you.
Well, there used to be bars. In fact, at one time there were 3 in the Waterloo region. This was not 100% a good thing. Bars are bars, but at the same time, it was I found a safe space, space to feel good about yourself. I was a crazy dancer before my knees went bad, and that was a physical space. That was a space you walked into, and unlike a Pride event, which is time dependent, whatever, this could happen at any time. We don't have that at the moment, but we have so much else, which I do appreciate, and to a large extent, we can thank Spectrum for that, and the fact that it covers ages from OK to be me to Spectrum Prime. I appreciate that a lot.
Final thoughts, I guess. I would say it's easy to think that it's a lot easier for people today, but there are some ways in which it is harder too. Right? When I went to school, my bullies stayed at school. Right? Now they go home with you in your pocket. And that's a huge difference. And that pervasiveness is something we didn't have to deal with. So that's, I think, a real big change and something we have to understand. So many things, like our ability to reach information was limited because, for instance, you can't look something up in a card catalog if you don't know what it's called, right? There's just no way to do that. There's no Ask Jeeves about that. You're screwed. And what you have to do then is to ask a librarian. Here's the situation. What word applies to this so I can look it up and find books about it, sort of thing. Whereas now that information is freely available to people of virtually any age, and that's different. That is a very big difference. And a lot of misinformation is available to kids and people like that too. So there are ways in which it is much easier, but there are ways in which it is still pretty damned hard. And I guess I just want to make sure that that gets acknowledged, because it's easy when you're talking to a bunch of elders for us to say, oh, you got it so easy now, sort of thing. But I think there's a realistic appreciation of the fact that there are ways in which it is definitely harder. So, yeah.
Thank you. I have 2 things I want to say, and with any luck, I will remember what both of them are a minute or 2 from now. The first thing is, I love your question. Honest to God, I was in library school in 1969, which for some of you, you'll know that was a pivotal year. That was the year of Stonewall, partial decriminalization of homosexual acts and things. I had a few gay friends in library school. They took me to some of the downtown bars in Toronto. I was in Toronto from 65 to 70. It was an interesting experience, but it was highly sexualized and quite intimidating, quite frankly. I came to Waterloo to work in the UW Library in 1970. Glow started up in 1971, and before long, we were having dances. And it was the first time I saw two men dancing together in a manner that did not seem highly sexualized, but seemed friendly and romantic. And that was a massive eye-opener for me. And gradually, the Bridgeport dances started up in 1974. I was never able to dance. One of my friends taught me how to do the bump, and that was pretty much you probably don't even know what the bump is, but anyway. So that means I'd have to get off this chair. Yeah, so they were community dances, very unlike the commercial dances and bars in Toronto. All sorts of dances. I was never able to dance, but it was a wonderful energy. We had various, and then eventually, around 1980, commercial bars and things like that. And as Lyn said, there was a point where we had, I think, 3 in the area. So to some extent, some of these will have a sexual energy that is not for everyone. And also, some people don't drink anymore. But there was still a sense of camaraderie. But I will never forget that glow dance. I think it was in the Hagey Hall in 1972 when I saw 2 men dancing together in a way that seemed almost romantic. So that was the first thing. And I remember what the second thing is now. Here's the second thing coming. I'm 80 years old. I have never wanted to have children. And yet, after being an activist for 50 years, I have many people who feel like siblings for me, Cait and Lyn. I have many people that I'm still close to who are like children to me. And I also have many people who are like grandchildren, and I care deeply for them. I'm in touch with these people on a regular basis. And that's why I care what's happening. It worries me. These are people who don't know what it was like 20 or 30 years ago. So these are my special friends. I work with people who are in their 20s and in their 40s and 50s. These are my family. We talk about chosen family, and that's a really important concept. So I'm concerned for my family. That was the second thing.
So a big thank you to Lyn McGinnis, Cait Glasson, and Jim Parrott for being with us here today. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. It's always a pleasure to get to spend time with you, and I appreciate you giving us your time. And I appreciate everyone in the audience for joining us and bearing the heat. So thank you for being here. I hope you enjoy the rest of the Pride Market.